Okay. Hello. Welcome. My name is Luca, Bergamo. I read here. I'm the Secretary General of Culture Action Europe, which is a network, or the widest European network of culture organization, now devoted to advocate for culture as a pillar for a sustainable society. So no longer a representation of a sector, but hopefully a voice, a societal voice, which is a change. This change has been finalized a couple of weeks ago with the approval of new rule of associations, including new mission and things in our General Assembly. And I'm grateful to NAN and IETM to having asked me to facilitate, moderate this conversation today, which I truly hope is a conversation. The title is challenging because it's cultural policies how we would love it. If we love the cultural policy, we could love. And the people sitting at the table, I'll introduce them later, is Euripides Laskarides. Where is the?
Euripides Laskarides.
Laskarides, that's why. So I should know, being Italian, I should have done it. John Kieffer and Alexis Alatsis, and you, because the idea is that they give us hints, ideas, their points of view, but then we discuss later on. I only want to, before giving the floor to Euripides, as first, then will be John and Alexis. I just want to, I have a very strong opinion about the topic, but I will not share it now. This is not my role. Though I want to just give you the assumption or the points of view from which I'm looking at the issue we are talking. And it's very short as this one. I agree 100% with what Alexander says in the morning, and it's written in IETM papers, is that we are living in a time which is not just a crisis, meaning for crisis something at the end of which you are the same that you were before. But we are living a time of transition in Europe, meaning that out of this period, we will be somewhere else. And the real challenge today is understand what are our assets and where we want to go. Why I say that? Because the basis of the society we know today in Europe, and I will only mention two, no longer exist. And whatever they say, offering or promising us that there will be the same future tomorrow of the past we know today, they lie. And they lie because the demographics of this continent does not allow anymore to mitigate the capitalism through the welfare the way we have done in the past, because of the relationship between the working age people and non-working age. I will not explain that, I just leave it this way. And the second one is that the wealth that we've built has been resulting from 500 years of global domination, which is no longer that. And these elements, joined to many others, prevent us to transform or to make alive the value on which we try to build a democratic society after the Second World War in the very same way we did it before. They are no longer the basis. So what I'm thinking is that the real challenge of this age is to understand how we build social innovation. We have been focusing for decades in whatever is innovation for competition, innovation for technology. But then the societal problem in Europe, and you see it enormously in Greece, you see it in my country, in Italy, you see it in Spain, in Portugal, it's seen in Ireland, and hopefully will be seen in Germany at a certain point. It's to understand how a social fabric based on solidarity and mutuality can be built in these different conditions. And what are the competencies, the skill, the approaches that enable us to do it. So if what is, my question to you, what has to be cultural policy in this framework? What role should be given to a policy that is being conceived as the policy towards the arts and artistic expression, which I think it doesn't make any more sense in this under this condition, taking into account that probably there are two different stages. One is that you need to survive here today, but you need to survive within a process which is conceived to be long-term impacting. Because if the answer we are looking for is to survival today without understanding where we go, we will simply perish. This is my opinion, and this is what I just want to pass you on in this challenging discussion. So I will start with, we start with Euripides, which defined himself as a freelance theater director and producer. Yes, but you're a producer.
Really?
Yeah. What's it before?
It's because there's a lot of producing in my own production.
But okay. So has been producer than the performer. That in 2009 he brought together collaborators to create his theater companies, which is known as Osmosis. His work have been presented in national and international theaters and festivals such as the New York City Fringe, Judson Church, the 11th Biennale of European and Mediterranean Artists. Actually, I did the 9th in the past as a director at that time. The Greek National Theatre and the Art International Summer Festival. You co-translated and directed Eugene Ionesco's The Chairs for Central Athenian Theatre with prominent Greek actors. And now you're currently working on one-man show revisiting the two dominant themes that run his artistic identity, which is ridicule and transformation. So on the base of that, or regardless of that, how do you see the challenge now for years?
There you go. I haven't done this before, apparently. So I was going to apologize for having this here, but I see everyone has one. So I haven't had the time to memorize, so I'm going to be reading. There was an unlucky event yesterday. We have a promenade that we are doing with my company Osmosis, and it was raining exactly the time that the promenade was going to happen, from 1 to 2:30. So we have a few costumes wet. I apologize. I will have to leave a little bit before we end. I'm very happy and flattered to be amongst you because my expertise is not cultural politics. So I look forward to the discussion that's going to happen afterwards, and hopefully it will enlighten me more to understand more of what Luca was just talking about, what this transition is, where we want us to be taken, and what steps we can take towards that. As a director and performer, I have closely seen how the lack of cultural politics in Greece can lead to very unhealthy cultural environments. I will give a very brief overview of where the performing arts stand right now in Greece in case you don't know. It's going to be brief, so we have time for discussion. It is common knowledge by now, at this point, that there is no government funding, that if your work is not commercial and if it's a little bit off the beaten track, there are very few private producers you can turn to. I can think of one. And of course, then you can only hope to break even. There's no chance you can make a salary. There's just one festival where you can hope to find support if you have a company, the Athens and Epidaurus Summer Festival, run by artistic director Yorgos Lukos. Then we see an uprise of public benefit foundations, such as the Onassis Foundation. They have a pretty strong, especially this year, they're coming up strong with the program, a lot of publicity, a lot of advertisement. It's being backed up by a lot of money because it's the Onassis Foundation. And the Niarchos Foundation is coming up soon. So it seems that if you are doing experimental work, you can hope that a public benefit foundation will think you're interesting and support you in a way. Before I talk a bit about an interesting paradox that has to do with the private producers not taking advantage, but as circumstances have brought it, they are in a way taking advantage of the crisis. I would like to mention the Dipethe. Dipethe is the regional theaters. We have regional theaters, and they are the only theaters that are actually still getting some of the money the government is supposed to give to support the arts. Then these regional theaters have directors, and if they're lucky to have an open-minded and inspiring director, they might have interesting stuff to show. Otherwise, they turn to more traditional mainstream things so that they can be likable, and there's a lot of how do you call it, corruption there. The paradox I was going to talk about the private producers is that you used to have these very serious and very dedicated artists working in the theater and getting some help from the government 10 years back, and of course their tickets, and the tickets were strong because they were very, very well known for doing quality work. Now the phenomenon is that from last year you see a lot of these people going to private producers, especially one or two very, very strong private producers who do a lot of very commercial work. As a result, you get that their needs cannot be met, because it's a different thing when you're doing fast-forward commercial stuff and when you have this persistent director that wants this and wants that and wants this that way, and he wants more time to rehearse. And what happens in the end is that the collaboration either falls out before the show starts or as soon as the show doesn't cut tickets. Residencies in Greece are almost non-existent, and big residencies are non-existent. Theater education in Greece in public schools and universities is not strong at all, even compared to the US, where art is pretty much marketed as a product. Even there, theater education is really strong from very young ages, not in Greece. As a result, we don't have trained audiences that could choose what to see and not go perhaps to the commercial stuff and try the experimental and support them with the ticket. There are a number of festivals around Greece each summer, especially outside Athens, and there is of course the Athens Summer Festival. Most of them do not take the challenge of giving their budget to young experimental work. They just actually rent ready-made productions, commercial productions, they bring them there, they give them huge money, and it doesn't make any sense. And thus, the audience still is not trained. The only festival that has done a pretty good job in showing us what's going on with the contemporary performance in Europe and in the world right now is the Athens Summer Festival under Yorgos Lukos, and that has been only for the last few years. I will put a full stop here. I gave you an idea of the difficult reality we face here in Greece, and on that basis, I believe we can start talking more to what can be done and to recommendations of how we can get out of this and have possible solutions, or see where this will, the next step, what will the next step be. But I just wanted to make sure that we all know in this room that even if it is a transition, it is a very difficult time for us, because we've come from good times. In 2004, Greece was doing very well, and there was wealth, and things were moving on, and you could find money. And it seems like a slap in the face. I'm sure Europe as well has the same feeling, but here, you see what I'm talking about. It's like dead end. You don't know where to turn to. It's one or two or three people you can turn to. So that's that. Thank you.
Can you? Okay. Just before going to John, I just want to ask you something. What do you think? There is a responsibility on us and on you specific in Greece, on the fact that being at war, there's no constituency, there's no army on your side. And if that, what should be, how can you recover in this specific moment, the fact that you don't have behind you or behind us a society which is asking to have that public sphere?
Could you repeat the question? So is there
The question is, do you think there is responsibility? You say just ending your speech. You say, but 5 years ago, everything was good.
Better.
Huh?
Better.
Much better. Okay, it's not. Yeah, right. Was much better. But then, what I'm asking is, 5 years ago was much better, but there is the responsibility, let's say, on your shoulder or on our shoulder, of the fact that being today worse, there's no social demand to support your demand or our demand. I mean, I just make the case in Holland, when the Dutch government has cut off public spending, they also made surveys to understand the population approaches. And the population would say, you know what, just cut culture spending because we need more health and education. So I'm asking you, is there any responsibility on your side for this lack of social demand, if there is a lack of social demand?
When you say lack of social demand, what do you mean?
But the cities, you say we don't have audience.
Okay, I see what you're
But it's not just audience in terms of market. It's also a kind of a societal demand, a political demand. I want to have a vibrant cultural life. And it seems to me, from what I listen, that you don't have this. So there is a responsibility on your side.
Of course, yeah.
What it is?
There is a responsibility on everybody's. I mean, whoever is doing art, I think, has a huge responsibility. But at the same time, there's not. I mean, I'm trained to do what I can do, and there's this part that I can actually wish for things to happen, and I can help in a way, but I cannot do everything. You know, you need support in a way. You need to find the people to talk to and to give you an advice and say, you know, this is happening to your country right now. This is happening to you as artists right now. What you could do is this, and that, and then somehow, because that's not my expertise, I don't know how to move around that. But I think what's really happening in Athens right now is that artists are coming together and are discussing on how we should move on. And this is an example, per se. And I think that's a great thing.
Alexis, then John, sorry.
Well, I think that your question was crucial because even if I agree completely with Euripides' saying about the situation in Greece, I would like to stress out that there is a responsibility, because when you say that 5 years ago everything was fine, it's only partially true, of course, you know that, because it's only superficially that 5 years ago there were subsidies, there were possibilities to do free theatre work in Athens, but in the same time the whole thing was a bubble, because there was no social demand for arts. There was no, let's say, any conscience from the side of the artists that they need to work also towards this direction. And the best example of it is that when the Ministry of Culture in Greece started huge discussions about the new subsidy system 2 years ago, even if they knew that there wouldn't be any, but they started a discussion. What should we change in the subsidy system in Greece? and it was an open dialogue through internet, via internet, and everybody could write his opinion about the subsidies. It was very interesting that many, many people took the chance to write something just to say, why do we need to give subsidies to art? There were many, many people in this open forum of the Ministry of Culture just writing down, why do we need to pay those crazy artists to do whatever they want to do? So you could feel that, socially speaking, there is a huge lack of social demand for arts and an understanding of the importance of arts in the society. So I think artists definitely have a responsibility for that. And they cannot say now that they just wake up in this crisis and they don't know where the crisis came from. Because nobody was interested in times back 10 years ago or 5 years ago to say there is a problem, there is a lack of education, there is a lack of understanding of the importance of arts in social life in Greece. And we have to work towards this direction, not only care about the subsidies we need to do our theater work, because it was very individualistic the way that we perceived our work. So everybody was just, searching for production possibilities and for subsidies, but there was no network between the artists. There was no understanding whatsoever. There was no, let's say, there was no feeling of being part of a bigger content and a bigger context. So I definitely agree with you that there is a responsibility and that we have to see that we ourselves didn't go far enough in demanding, in searching ways of strengthening this social demand, and now we find ourselves in the crisis because we didn't do it. So to understand the past is important in order to say what kind of policies we wish for the future. Thank you.
I'm not sure, but I think this paved the way for John's stories, because he says John has a huge experience. You will, sorry if I'll tell about your experience piece by piece, because otherwise it gets long. But he will tell us about things that happens overseas in Latin America as well. He says 30 years experience has been running everything. Just for you to know, he's been working for the Art Council, the Dutch Museum, the Tate Modern, the British Council, the BBC, and more and more is a policy advisor, writer. It's a guy which has had many opportunities in life to go around, look, listen, understand, and think. And I guess his contribution to this discussion could be extremely interesting. So it's at your own risk.
It's an extremely scary build-up. I should say that half the organisations you mentioned I resigned from, so if anybody wants a resigning workshop later on, I can do that. Well, I'm going to do two things really. One of which is just to talk a little bit about what I think a cultural policy should contain, if you like, what it should be about. If we're talking about trying to develop a new one, it's probably worth thinking about what those ingredients should be. And a little bit about looking backwards, in a sense, only not just to beat ourselves up, but also to look forward and see how we could do things differently. So I'll be using probably, I apologise for this, probably slightly too many examples from the UK, but I think that they stand, I think, for most countries in Europe and so forth. So just to kick off with the whole cultural policy thing, I mean, I think one of the problems is we often think cultural policy is the same thing as arts funding. It's not, really. It should contain a lot more than just arts funding. It should have a deep understanding about how the not-for-profit arts sector relates to the commercial industries. It should have a deep understanding about how the heritage arts organisations, if you like, the established arts organisations, need to be fed by a vibrant independent sector. We need to think about how education and learning relate to creativity. We need to think about the effect of technology on people. I mean, technology has been a major change, I think, in terms of how people experience culture in the widest sense. And it needs, as Luca was saying, needs to look at changing demographics and what kind of effect that has on it. And there's probably lots more as well. So cultural policy is not just about how to fund the arts and who to fund. It should be about something much more than that. cultural policy obviously historically come down from above, and I think also we need to think about how people are rethinking their lives, rethinking their societies, rethinking their cities, and maybe think about, is there a way of having a cultural policy that comes bottom up, something that's actually developed not just by practitioners, but by practitioners working closely with the public and working closely with the people. Now, I should start off with what I believe, and I believe that it's good for government to support the arts and culture. I mean, spiritually, economically, socially, and so forth. I mean, I think there's a basic proposition there which I would start from. So if you're talking about values, that's where I start from as well. But I think we need to think of different ways of making the argument. I mean, one of obviously the situation in Greece, as we've just heard and all know, really, is something that's very, very difficult at the moment. But I've just been doing a little bit of reading up for a potential project in Colombia, in Medellin, in Colombia. Now, 10 years ago, Medellin was seen as being a total write-off. It was run by drugs, literally run by drugs lords. The economy had completely collapsed, and the whole city was on its knees. And now, through a mixture of not just arts and culture, but good planning, rethinking education, rethinking local provision, it was just voted by the Wall Street Journal, of all people, as being the most innovative city in the world. So they looked at the arts and culture in a wider framework and led with it, in a sense. I mean, one of the first things they did was to build libraries in the poorest areas of the city, not the ones which were asking for them, but they went and put them up in different parts of the city. So if you're looking for a good argument to use with politicians or policymakers, just go online and have a look at Medellin and look about what they've done, actually. I mean, they were as down as you could get, if you like, and they've revitalized themselves, and they've put culture in the middle of it. So I'm going to be quite hard. I'm going to look at a few elements of things which I don't think have worked in the past, and I'm going to be quite harsh with this and probably go slightly over the top in terms of what I say. But I feel quite passionate about this as well. And I've just turned 60 this year, and one of the interesting things about being 60 is I can remember a time in the mid-70s when there wasn't anything called arts management, there wasn't anything called social policy, there was very little funding around. We were kind of broke then, and we're broke again now, so I'm getting these kind of weird decade-long looks back at my past. And my first experience in the arts was by squatting a bookshop, well, squatting a pub, actually, and turning it into a bookshop, and bringing it into use. And we had a performance space in it. It was a meeting place for artists and so forth as well. It kind of sounds kind of familiar, really. I mean, there's a lot of that kind of activity going on now. But thinking back about that time and thinking about some parallels between now and then, it does seem that it was much more straightforward then, and there was a relationship that had to be maintained with an audience and with people. Otherwise, we could not make any money. All of us were working in the daytime doing other jobs anyway, building sites and so forth. But really, it's about how to maintain that kind of relationship. And I think something very odd happened in the 80s, actually. I was talking to Andrew Jones in the British Council about this last night, actually. There was suddenly a moment when artists, people who wanted to put on interesting performance, stopped looking at the audience and started looking at the funder. That's a terrible generalization, and it's obviously not that straightforward. But there was a moment when people started to address funders rather than addressing audiences, and I think that was a terrible thing to do. And it got worse and worse during the 90s, and in a sense what happened then was a whole profession developed in order to manage that relationship on both sides. So artists and arts organizations started to gather people around them who could do that relationship. Funders then had to get bigger staff in order to deal with that relationship. And it was a real problem. And I think we're living in the kind of slipstream of that to some extent. And it's worth thinking about some very basic things about what that relationship should be. And I think, in a sense, what we're talking about in lots of countries, even though it's kind of covered up with accountability and planning and so forth, is a kind of patronage that's going on that doesn't do anybody any good. In a way, it kind of demeans both sides of the equation. And what we have to do, it's very difficult to say this, but what we have to do as people who are practitioners, we need to stop doing it. And what the funders need to do is to stop expecting it from us as well. We need to get a very different kind of relationship, working together with a wider constituency to develop what is a kind of cultural policy. Now, also kind of agreeing really with Luca about the situation. I mean, I think we're not seeing a temporary situation here, either in Greece, either in Europe or another part. We're seeing capitalism in a cycle of decline, actually, and this will repeat itself over and over again. So the idea that somehow or other things are going to automatically get better is probably foolish to think about that. So we've got to think about this happening again, unless we all collectively do something about it. And I do believe that the arts and culture and the creative economy as a whole have something major to play in there. So this is not temporary. I mean, what's happening here in Greece is going to happen somewhere else in Europe soon. Could even, I think it could happen in the UK. I don't think it wouldn't surprise me at all, actually, if the UK economy went down the toilet in the next couple of years. But there's a really big kind of but in all this as well, is that the two things the arts and artists have always done well, one of which is to critique how society works, and that can obviously be sometimes have huge kind of risk associated with as well, as recent events here have shown. But the second is that artists and creators can show through their work and also how they make their work, how society could be different and hopefully better. So exposing what's wrong with the world and trying to make it better. So the job here is just not to save ourselves, but to help save the world. So that's not too much of an ask anywhere. I'm not putting any pressure on anybody here or anything like that. So a few things. We'll talk about buildings, which is one aspect of, in a way, over the last 15, 20 years, we've built this massive cultural real estate across Europe. Obviously, some countries have gone more mad than others. And a lot of these buildings do not have a purpose. They were somebody's vanity project, whether it was a politician, whether it was an artistic director of a building, and so forth. And I think if we get to the stage where we start thinking about what kind of buildings we want for the future, then they must have a purpose. They must add value. Not only are they kind of end up being follies, but they also end up being, in a sense, undercapitalized. So the work suffers. So much money goes into the fabric of the building that there's not money to make work and so forth. So let's make sure that if we get another injection of funds at some point or other, we don't start putting hundreds of buildings up that we don't need again. In the UK, it was crazy. I mean, the National Lottery, I got in a lot of trouble, but when the National Lottery came on stream and started putting money into capital projects, I described it as being a feeding frenzy. And I basically got exercise from most social groupings at that point. So, but I think we just need to think about it. The next thing is about audiences, and that's already been touched on a bit now. We've been basically trying the same tricks for the last 30 years in order to attract new audiences. And I would say it hasn't worked. I mean, there are examples. Individual organisations will say, yes, we've got a new audience for our work. There may be cities and so forth as well. But the overall impact we have made as a not-for-profit arts sector we haven't got new audiences. And that's not from want of trying, and we're not bad people. It's not because we're bad people. But I think we've been trying the same thing over and over again to do it. We've been trying outreach work, we've been trying ticket schemes and so forth. And I just think as part of reimagining what a cultural policy should be, we should start thinking of some new ways of doing this. You know, it's a classic Einstein quote, if you do the same thing over and over again and it gets the same results and you keep on doing it, then it's madness, basically, or insanity. So we have to think of a different way of coming to an accommodation with an audience. And I think that some of that is not about thinking them as an audience, it's about thinking them as being the public owners of what we do. I mean, if there is any public funding available, which hopefully there will be again here, then it's not only our right to have that money, it's that they partly own what we do. I don't mean they start programming venues and so forth, but we just need to rethink about how that can happen. I think the downside of that, and again that was touched on earlier on, is that if we don't get a bigger constituency supporting what we do, then people are going to start to challenge the legitimacy of what we do. I mean, not the fact who gets what money, but is arts funding itself actually worth doing in this situation with declining resources and so forth. Next thing really was it's a kind of economic point really, and it came out of my colleague Sheila Wright, who I've co-written a couple of books with, was at a seminar a little while ago, which was chaired by an economist, and it was about the arts, and it was about how the arts work. And he was very quiet. He sat there and did his chairing duties, didn't make much. And right at the end of it, he said, I've just been sitting in a room for 2 hours with you people, and all you've talked about is the supply side. Nobody's talked about demand. So basically what you're doing is how to increase money for making work, producing work, but nobody here has talked about. And he said, I cannot imagine any situation in any other part of civil society or what business where people would only talk about the supply side. So running on from that kind of point about audiences, we've got to think about how we kind of balance the economy around what we do. It's not about, the case of Greece is getting any money to make work, I understand that, but generally it's about, we have to think about both sides of the equation. And again, running off that point, Rocco Landsman, who's the chair of the NEA in the States quite recently, said that we have to look at our kind of eyes in our stomachs here a bit, and there's a radical mismatch between the desires and expectations of arts organisations and the interests and needs of society, the wider society. And that went down really badly. I mean, he resigned as chair of the NEA afterwards. But he has a point, actually. I mean, there is a point where we have to think about what we do in relation to what people are interested in and try and bring those things much more back into balance. So, what am I going to talk about next? Yeah, I mean, just a bit more on that kind of patronage situation as well. I mean, it is so ingrained now, that situation where a lot of young arts managers, and I mentor quite a lot of people both on the commercial side and on the, it's so built in now that success means getting a grant. I've had people coming out of, university courses and so forth, and they see, one of them actually said, I said, what's the best thing you've done so far? And it was getting a £40,000 art from the Arts Council. And I said, what about your work? What about the work you made and so forth? And I think that has to go, we have to go right back into the system and start unlocking that kind of expectation as well. Last point, pretty much so, is really about structure as well. I mean, a lot of arts organisations are structured around a not-for-profit basis, either being charities or voluntary organisations and so forth. 30 years ago, a friend of mine wrote a book called What a Way to Run a Railroad, which was about the voluntary sector. And it was about boards, and it was about that kind of governance. And basically saying, this is broken. We need to think of different ways of both representing the interests that are involved around what we do in a structure of an organisation. And 30 years on, very little has happened across that. And maybe as part of rethinking what cultural policy should be about, we should start rethinking what kinds of organisations we want, what kinds of structures do we want, what kinds of ways do we want to raise money? And I know there's a session later on in this about this. Just thinking, if there is increasingly becoming a clean slate, maybe we should start rethinking that. A last point is about social mobility. I mean, my background, I had dinner with two friends of mine a couple of weeks ago. My father worked in a factory, and my friend's father ran a pound shop. They're like kind of discount store in Essex. And both of us, towards the end of the dinner, suddenly realised that if our equivalents now would not be able to do what we were doing, there is no way that we would have got from where we were to where we are now. And that was a profoundly depressing thought. And I think the whole thing about social mobility within the arts has kind of stopped. It's stalled a long time ago. And as part of the rethinking again, we need to think about how we can, as well as appealing to a wide range of people, how we can start to just get different people working in our sector and thinking about ourselves. I've got more, but I'll leave it actually, because I'm going over time. Just to say that, as the world gets harder to live in, let's not just defend what we've got and put up the drawbridge, and basically let's try and make things better. And I think if we can do something which looks different, feels different to what it was before, that's the kind of cultural policy I'd love to bits, really.
Alexis, who defines himself as a freelance theatre director, but actually being freelance, he's been in charge of selection for culture in Athens Olympics, and the artistic director of Patras when he was European Capital of Culture. So it was a freelance, but quite in touch with power, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, I say the freelance, but quite in touch with power, at least. I think there's a lot of food on the table. If you should respond to these questions, how would you? And the question is, seems to me that in order to do cultural policy, you need to build a wider alliances, so which not just the people. So what that would impact in defining cultural policies. And second, in Greece, okay, here, not worldwide. And secondly, what should be the priorities? So given that that there is just a lack or an accessibility of public funding over limited. So if you were in position of taking responsibility of cultural policies, how would you address these two problems?
Well, that's quite a huge question, no? Thing is that I totally agree with what John said about social mobility, because a side effect of the crisis in Greece, and not only in Greece, is that it's tricky, because if you look at what happens in Athens, speaking about performing arts, it's not that we have less productions or less performing artists doing works. So it can create the feeling for someone who's not involved that there is still money around, so there is still a possibility to work in the arts. The larger audience doesn't seem to understand that if you don't have some kind of financial backup, whether it's your family or whether it's something that you do outside of arts, then you cannot work in the arts anymore. So probably there is a complete lack of social mobility, meaning that someone who doesn't have a very strong financial backup by his family cannot even think of doing art, because there is the knowledge, at least to the younger people that go in these fields, that they cannot live out of it. So what's happening is that there are a lot of people doing, of course, new projects, but the larger audience doesn't understand where the money comes from. So, and that ends up with this kind of reactions when you come to talk about cultural policy or subsidies or public funding, that the audience say, why do we have to increase, or why do we have to spend money at all, since it's happening anyway? There are performances anyway. There are 350 different projects in Athens last year in theater. So if you have 350 new productions, what do you need money for? So I think if I had to design any kind of cultural policy, and since it's not only about arts funding, it's about, like John said, a broader area, I would start by looking at the problem of building again the social demand for arts and the social demand for culture. And to do so, you can only start by the education. And to continue a little on what Euripides said, it's not only that there is no real arts education in the schools in Greece, it's that they even use this public feeling that because of the crisis we should focus on other things than on arts, to actually cut the rest of it in the schools and the educational system in Greece. So even if there were some kind of arts in the public educational system in Greece, now they will reduce it even more. So there will be no theater classes or no music classes at all in the secondary education in Greece. So what creates a huge problem, because if you don't give access through the education to the meaning of art, generally speaking, to the younger people that come out of school, then you cannot expect them by themselves to find all these values, understand these values, and demand from the policymakers that they support these values. So I would say, before rediscussing the problem of the artists and the arts actors and their problem of surviving in this crisis without fundings, I would start by discussing the problems of education and the problems of how to work within society to recreate the feeling that arts are a pillar of social cohesion and of social wealth. And it's a very difficult topic because then you have to go really deep into how the educational systems work and how it could be integrated. And it's not only about, you know, increasing the hours of doing whatever, music or theater in the schools. It's how you do it. It's how you relate that to real, vibrant culture that happens outside, and how you give all these younger people the feeling that it has something to do with their lives, and etc., and how you also find new ways of working with all kinds of new technologies and new media towards that, because you cannot work, as you said very well, with old recipes in new situations. So if you have a completely new situation, you have to find new recipes. So it's not about, you know, reclaiming the going back to the nice 80s or nice 90s. It's to reclaiming of starting from zero, actually, in Greece again, and building audiences, building a social feeling that arts are important and culture is important. And the interesting thing about, well, because you mentioned that I had to deal with power, that's true, but it was a very interesting experience when it comes to the Olympics, for example, because the main thing that struck me when I worked for the Olympics and the artistic program of the Olympics is that the Olympics in Greece had this very, very strange slogan saying sports is culture. And we had to work with that all through this kind of time. We worked for Athens 2004, and to me it was a huge problem, because sports, and especially sports in the way they work in the Olympics, are, to me, the contrary of culture. It's commerce. It's nothing else than big show, but a big show that doesn't come from the bottom up, as you said before. It's just a large-scale project that then, as an alibi, tries to include culture or arts in order to give, let's say, a humanistic sense or a humanistic content to something that it's not culture at all. And so when you come to work in these kind of positions, you have the problem that in the same time you do it because you're trying to work within these kind of systems in order to maybe try to change something in the way it's done. But it's also difficult because maybe we should understand that these projects are not anymore the kind of projects that can answer the problems of cultural policy or culture as a part of social life, generally speaking. So to come back to your question and wrap it up, I think the only way to increase social demand for arts and social understanding of the importance of culture is to go back to the problems of education and problems of communication within each European society, and try to see it globally.
Sorry. I don't see it, but I know that somewhere is Christoph Knock. Where are you? Oh, right. He's been working at building a kind of coalition in Berlin of independent cultural scene. And I wonder what the situation has been described to you. It refers to the experience you have there, and if there's anything that can be reached. And by the way, I was naturally joking, saying that I hope that Germany leave the same situation of Greece, which I don't. By the way, sir.
Well, thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear from what you all said on the stage, and the responsibility that culture has in a society, the question of rebuilding a society or maybe rebuilding a place bottom up and not from top down. I guess I wasn't in Berlin at the beginning of the 90s. I have a little bit the feeling that this city has been rebuilt bottom up. When after the wall broke down, there was this immense space everywhere. There was space everywhere that you could use. So there was this rich situation of spaces of possibility. There was no money. Berlin is, after all, it's not Munich, it's not Frankfurt, it's not Stuttgart, so it's not a rich town. It seems to be rich now, and it is rich in culture, but it's not rich in money. This development led to, I think, a very beautiful situation of having many artists from all over the world. We speak and estimate that there are some 40 to 50,000 people working in arts in Berlin. But we see that only 5% of the public funding goes into independent art. Most of the money goes into institutions, the 3 operas, the 5 big, beautiful theaters, and the museums. So money-wise, in a certain way, it is a good situation, but this is only good for institutions. It is very, very difficult for all these people that work in independent art, not funded on an institutional level. So last year, in February, Jochen Sandig, who is actually sitting down here, sort of called out into the Berlin scene and said, let's sit together and let's come together and see what we can do. And let's maybe, for the first time, set aside all the different individual or particular interests that we have in dance, in visual arts, in performing arts, and in all the different kinds of arts that exist. And let's sit together and try to find common grounds. And that surprisingly went well and fast. And we developed 10 demands, which is partly a better funding of arts, a better funding of production of art, not a funding of institutions, but a funding of individual artists and projects. And also we spoke about the necessity to need that spaces exist, and that in urban planning they respect that there have to be places. I think the outrage was very big, because we see in Berlin that the city uses our work to a very, very large extent to make publicity. There is loads of campaigns to say, be Berlin, be this creative city, this is the city where creativity is successful, and shit like that. And the city uses this, but doesn't do anything for it. So we came together, and this was the result was a very, very surprising one, that in the moment when we stopped to speak about individual and particular interests, in the moment where we all stood together and said, we called ourselves the Coalition of Independent Scene of All Arts, and that we had a couple of people, speakers, individually recognizable people, which is, I know, conceptually completely wrong for a heterogeneous artistic scene, which is just not on one, you cannot define it on one person, but politically it was super, super interesting how powerful it became. We had immediate response in the press, and we had a more and more and a better position also towards the politicians. So now they are discussing about the next budget for 2014 and 15, and we thought we should make a campaign, we should work on that, and we should raise our voice and really make ourselves heard and influence this decision. And we started to lobby. It's classical lobbying work. We went to 64 of the 90 different deputies who are in the ruling parties, is SPD and CDU. And I'm not sure, but it seems that we managed to raise the money that went into independent scene by approximately 12%, which is completely surprising. The thing, of course, is much deeper. It is a question about artistic practice. Is that the work that art is recognized often only so people think that art is where art is written on. So if there's written on opera, or if there's written on theater, or if there's written on museum, this is where art is. And the other stuff is amateurish, or is young, or is not really relevant. So the question was very much to explain this relevance, and I think this is what you also mentioned on that we have constantly to renew this contract, this understanding with the audience, with the society, how necessary, how important art is. It is not about the big projects. Of course, there are artists that have a good name, that have an international reputation, and that tour the world. That is, of course, always a good example. But the fabric of understanding why it should be, why money should go in there and why it is important for society are the micro initiatives in a little neighborhood, in a little shop that transforms into an artistic place. And there were many of these in Berlin. So I think it sort of worked, or there is sort of a tradition that was created that it really helped different neighborhoods to develop. Of course, we were partners in gentrification, and this is a big problem. It's a very big problem. But on the other hand, that also gave us the possibility, for example, to sit on a same podium with people from the Chamber of Commerce, and whereas the politicians didn't really understand what was going on in independent scene, people in economy completely understood that. Because, for example, tourism flourishes in Berlin. There is a raise of 9% per year, so it's like Chinese numbers, how much this economy works. And they know that, and they made research, and they see that 7 of 9 reasons why tourists come to Berlin is because of arts. So the Chamber of Commerce naturally sat with us and said, yes, of course, it's absolutely important that this art exists. So I think the interesting thing was, and also it was difficult also in a discussion with other people in the art scene, because they naturally would say, don't speak to the people from economy, don't speak to the people of there because it's bad or something like that. So there were ideological problems. But it was super interesting to find new allies, for example, in economy, for example, seeing people, decision makers in policy, not as enemies, but as people who have very, very weak understanding and often are maybe sometimes a little stupid, sometimes also just not really, maybe they don't have the time to know everything or to go everywhere. So to help them or to develop them as allies, to speak with them and to explain to them what is going on. So there were bus tours that were organized through the different places of production in art, so that they could see what was going on there. And all of a sudden they realized, oh, this is not amateurish, this is not only young, or it's not just you start here because you want to go to institutions. It is a second way how to produce art in independent scene. So I think this conception, first of all, to stand together and not to speak about individual and particular interests, but about common interests. Secondly, to explain what the role of art is in a society, and to go this dangerous way to speak with people from economy. It is dangerous because often then art will be explained as a tool to produce money or a tool to produce economy, which of course is wrong. I think the means of art should be art. That's it. It shouldn't be to create a better society, or shouldn't be to make more money, or shouldn't be that we live in a more comfortable or more interesting society. But in the end, art also plays a certain role in society. So it is important to be in this communication and to speak. And all this together created kind of a strong movement, and we're in the middle of it. I don't know where it will lead to, but well, we work on it.
Thanks a lot. It can be the city government and interlocutors, serious interlocutors, to do policy, and then something Euripides said at the beginning, there's been excessive concentration on Athens. So how would you balance these two things? But instead of having answer from here, I would like to have it, yes, I guess someone there. You can give the mic.
Thank you. Hello, Darren. My name is Goran Tomka. I come from Serbia. I would just continue on what you have previously said. As John said, and Luca also, culture policy is not about funding. It's much more broad. And this is what we are actually seeing, that if we define culture policy in such a narrow way, we have less and less of it. But at the same time, we see that policies are more and more cultural. We had a really interesting example from Serbia. I would like to tell it in really short. Our prime minister a couple of months ago signed this really important and Europe-wide celebrated agreement with Kosovo on some kind of, let's say, mutual respect or whatever. But at that same very day, in the evening, after coming from the Brussels, he went to the concert of Ceca Ražnatović, which is really super nationalist. I mean, not to go into that. So in the same day, he said, I'm European, but also I'm nationalist. And his going to the concert is actually cultural policy. It is implicit, but it is cultural policy. So we are having, we see the movement of policy into cultural direction, but we should also see the movement of arts and culture into the political direction. And this is what I think that Christoph and the whole crew are doing. So arts needs to be much more political. That's for me. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I pass it from this way? Thanks.
Hi, my name is Irini. I want to go back to your initial question to Euripides about, you asked if we feel that we have any responsibility because there wasn't any kind of social protest when government money, were stopped. And I wanted just to say that the situation in Greece is totally different than in other countries in Europe. Let's not all forget that the cultural policy phenomenon is a post-war phenomenon, and it's part of the welfare state concept. Well, this welfare state concept never really existed in Greece. At least, we never managed to embrace arts and culture as one of the public goods for which the state should provide for. So the debate about cultural diversity, democratization of culture or cultural democracy, or these arguments about how the arts and culture contribute to the economy or the creation of new jobs, etc., there was never such a debate in Greece. So we are starting from a different starting point. I mean, society is not familiar, with the whole debate about the value of culture and the arts as a public good. So I think we're starting definitely from a different point. I don't know if this is good or bad, but it's not the same. But across the whole Europe nowadays, I think we all face a similar problem. And the problem is that more or less in all countries, public funding is gradually reduced, and we don't have the society backing up the creative sector. We don't have, I feel that society is not an ally, as it could be in other decades, for example. I think our responsibility is that we have lost a kind of relevance to the society. We may not be as relevant as we used to be, and I think the answer to that is not trying to invent new arguments to legitimize culture and the arts as, that they need to receive public funding. It's not to reinvent these arguments or reshape these arguments. I think we have plenty of arguments. The thing is that we are not part of the decision-making process. We have lost our power to influence decisions and to shape our own future. And it's not just the arts. I think it's a problem of democracy, of quality of democracy, and I think that should be a key priority question. Are we as artists, as creative, cultural sector, what do we do to improve the quality of democracy and be able to to gain our place again in the decision-making?
Just coming back on that point a bit, actually, I mean, it's very familiar, I think, what you're saying. I mean, obviously, it's quite aggravated here in Greece with that kind of lack of background. But I think sometimes we get in a situation where we, in a way, lobby for ourselves. We try and represent, as you say, there's so many arguments now for why the arts are important. And that, occasionally, it's just interesting to think about completely changing the way that conversation happens and shifting it somewhere completely different. There's an organisation I've been having a bit of contact with recently in the UK called Liberty, which works with young people. And the entire way they work is by asking questions. So rather than saying young people are important, we need to look, whatever, they will ask a question like, why do young people kill each other? Which They've been asked to look at the problems of gun crime and gang crime amongst young people. So, and then it brings all kinds of resources into it. So it brings cultural artists into the mix, brings other people into the mix and so forth as well. And it just moves out of that two-way conversation, which is a very increasingly difficult one to have, because we've tried economic arguments for the arts, we've tried regeneration arguments for the arts, and even in the UK, where the arts are much more established, believe me, politicians don't really believe those arguments. You know, there's something that will trump that every time. So but by asking what kind of role can the arts play in making this place better, then you shift the argument to somewhere else. And it's much more difficult then to say your views are not legitimate because you're artists, but you're actually contributing to a different kind of conversation. And I think sometimes if it's just not working, it's like a relationship, if it's just not working, you need to try something else sometimes to make it work. And I think I like questions because they're open and they bring different resources and different people into the conversation. And with technology now, you can ask questions. And I think the power of that question being asked by the arts community, not about itself, is very strong. So, you know, if it is a question about how do we make Athens open space better, and this is being asked by artists, but it's to everybody. That's a very powerful thing, I think, sometimes.
Yes. Someone there? 2, 3, one at a time. Just pass it over. Okay, you started.
Yeah, thank you. I am Olga Tsakiridis from the National Center of Social Research. In Greece, officially, the non-workers are reaching the percentage of 28%, approximately. Unofficially, this gap is bigger, mostly in youngs and especially in women. How cultural organization can contribute to this? I think is a strong factor to rethinking the structures that you mentioned before, not only to benefit, but to give food for the mind of these people who cannot afford paying the tickets as well. Thank you.
Hi there. Willie White from Dublin in Ireland. I attended a meeting 2 weeks ago of the Global Irish Economic Forum where the greatest minds, commercial and otherwise, were gathered to try and think of ways out of Ireland's problems. And I participated in a cultural working group. And in that group were people from the arts, from design, as well as the minister and a senior civil servant. We were anticipating the budget which came last Tuesday. And the civil servant said, yes, it's fantastic, we think the arts are great, but there's just no money. So I suppose I don't accept that argument, because we're talking not about private money, not about the money of shareholders, we're talking about the money of the public, my money as well as everybody else's. We don't have such a problem with social demand in Ireland. More the problem is that it can't be made a priority. There's no question about the health budget, it overran by 90 million. There's no question about 500 million stimulus package for capital infrastructure. But the arts, which at the same time the government expects to be part of our recovery, part of projecting Ireland's reputation internationally, they simply are not prepared to pay for. And what I think this comes down to is a lack of vision. The arts aren't, I mean, they said we can't spend money in the arts because it's about the economy. But I'm going, the arts are part of the economy. And also in a country like Ireland, which doesn't have much in the way of natural resources, it's about intellectual property, and the arts are about people, and people generate intellectual property. So there's a real difficulty there, and it's a lack of vision. One of the problems, though, is that we need, based on what you were saying, John, we need more precise terms. Culture is what people like to do, and many different business models happen in culture. There's the funded business model, there's the entrepreneurial business model, there's crafts, there's animation. And there's been a lot of good work done in Britain since the mid-90s in terms of trying to have a better understanding of that. But the politicians say creative industries, and it means, it's taken to mean one thing when it's really a very heterogeneous sector. Also, like, we're all speaking through the medium of English. Do we accept Anglo-globalization? Are we happy? Do we want to retain something distinctive about our own identities? Is culture an important part of that? I think we should consider these things. It's convenient to speak in English, but is that all that we are? When it comes to stimulating demand, an extension of the lack of vision. So we're in a crisis, and in a crisis people deal with what's happening now. We want to stimulate the economy, so we focus on science, technology, engineering, mathematics. We don't imagine that there will be a future. We don't imagine that there'll be a tomorrow. So that ideology frames our education system. So we say, well, the arts can't be a priority. We've got to focus on what will create jobs very soon. We don't think that those people working in those jobs in the future might want to be part of a society as well as an economy. And here I actually have to disagree with Christoph, although I think many of the things that they're doing in Berlin are great. Simply making an argument, it won't work for us anyway, simply making an argument of art for art's sake is not going to work. Neither will it, making an argument, say, art, it'll reduce young offending or increase literacy. That won't work either. So we have to find, there has to be some understanding that art delivers a benefit, however difficult it is to capture it, however esoteric it might be. But I think the benefit that it does is it creates a public space in society, and it creates a space that is one that is not governed by the logic of the market. Let the market exist alongside it, but the arts is about public space, it's about discourse, it's about dissent, and crucially it's about what seems to be lacking in much of our policy in Ireland, it's about vision, and that vision of the kind of future that we might want to live in. Sinead.
Hello, my name is Tony Gonzalez. I'm coming from Barcelona, Spain. Well, I agree with she said about the lack of democracy, and this is a point in this moment. We've been having a long crisis during 3 years in Spain, and we have discussed a lot of new ways to organize and new ways to do things in the artistic sector, to develop our careers and to work in good conditions, to make good artistic work. And this is the point. And this has been the point of the discussions. And now I'm coming here and I see that I think we are discussing the same points that 3 years ago, before the crisis, and nothing happened. And we went to talk to politicians, we went to talk and convince them that we need public money and we can develop a new work again at the same way we did before. I think there are something more important, and one is the lack of democracy. I wanted to say is the politicians and the systems don't like arts, don't like contemporary arts, and it's for this reason they don't support the arts. And this has to be very clear, and we have to talk about the influence of the economy and the influence of the big corporation or the right parties that support the governments now in Europe. But we still, or it's the same people of cultural civil servants that 3 years ago talk about cultural industries and going to the society to build new audiences. Is the same people talking the same discourse, the same, but it's not. It's the artistic sector have to organize for themselves, have their own identity, and to talk directly, face-to-face, with politicians. And if they don't want to talk with the same languages of the artistic sector, don't talk anymore. Don't talk anymore. Wait. Never cut the dialogue, the ways of dialogue. But wait, we have to discuss in the same conditions. Somebody told they are instrumentalizing the arts for Olympic Games in Athens, for Berlin Cultural Capital or Berlin Creativity Capital. They need the artistic sectors. But when the artistic sectors go to them as a beggars to ask for money because they need the money, no, it's not. We need to empower the artists and the association first to do good artistic work, and second, to organize in different ways, in new ways, to be self-efficient or something like that, maybe. And this is the way. And then we will discuss. But all this talking about cultural policies, the same than 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the same people talking the same. This is rough. This is not. I think it's not interesting anymore after 3 years. And I come from, I said I come from Spain. We are in maybe very radical positions because it's a very radical, the moment in Spain. But the places, for example, in Madrid, there is not only economical crisis, there is political crisis. Is the extreme right governing the community, the region. They don't have any money, but in this moment, the activity, the cultural artistic activity in Madrid, the new contemporary is very strong, and they have raising their voices up by themselves. And I suppose the future could be better for them than for Catalans, for example, that are more close to the government. Okay.
I just, hold on a second, as someone at first. I want to give the mic to David Pledger, which wrote a book revaluing the artist in the new world order. But before that, I wanted to make a comment. I think there's, let's put it this way. I don't think the conversation today or in these days, the same conversation happened years ago. The major different point is that what she said, what everybody said more or less, is that the main problem is that the only constituency for the art demand is the one that have been working with art. So that the artistic sector has been advocating for itself without building a social demand for the arts. And the problem in this time of transition, exactly because it is a transition, it's not a crisis, it's exactly the contrary. Because if we want to rebuild democracy, we need to imagine that cultural development, which is not cultural policy, the cultural development is the first political priority for the society. Then the government can understand or not. But then you have to fight for. And to fight for, you don't fight just between artists and doing the arts, but you do it with the people who work in the environment, you do it with people who work in education, you do it with people who work for human rights, for women's rights, for kids, because it's this part of the society that has to make a common discourse, saying where the society has to go. If you do that, you can do a fantastic work on the ground, which is maybe paving way, it's part of the old things. But if you just do that and you don't engage in this other sphere, which is a large sphere of being politically responsible, then the end of this crisis will be a non-democratic society in part of this continent. That's where we are, a society which is led by financial interest, which is where we are. I mean, that's the situation. So I don't think the discussion today has the very same nature of discussion had in the past. And in my opinion, again, this is a, let's say, kind of contribution of the cultural policy, is that this work needs to be done first and foremost at the level of cities. This is where you can coalition people on the ground, because you find, you see the impact of what you do. It's not abstract. And if you don't have education for kids' attendance to artistic life, then you may start thinking to build a coalition of all of you which do this job. You take responsibility to do this job, regardless that there is a policy, because you make a policy. With all the contradiction that might have. I'm sorry, just I felt compelled to say these things. David.
Thank you very much. My name's David Pledger. I'm basically here at the behest of the publishers of the paper, the essay that I've just written, Currency House in Australia. I'd like to, actually first what I would really like to do is I'd like to, because I'm in the presence of Greek artists and I'm an artist myself, I'd like to say that I've been extremely humbled by the conversations and the work that I've seen of the Greek artists over the last 3 or 4 days that I've been here, and it's an absolute pleasure to be able to engage with where you are at the moment, and I feel like there's quite a lot of pain and anger still being played out, so the time that you give us is very much appreciated. I'd like to pick up on one point which was, I think, really raised earlier, which is that the way that the artist feels in society today is not exceptional to the artist. The way that the artist feels in relationship to society is the way that many citizens feel. And that is because I think there's a real disconnect between civil society and political culture. There is a frame that might be of use to think about this, which is the frame which is both ideological and economic. And essentially the argument goes that neoliberalism is a function of capitalism, and that the project of neoliberalism is essentially anti-democratic. Capital will do better if democracy is disabled, and so many of the occurrences are happening within that larger frame. So the argument for the artist is, what is my role in doing that? And I think, and I'll talk just briefly from the Australian perspective. In Australia, artists are very much marginalised in society. You may not think that's the case in terms of the amount of people that you get at IETM meetings these days. I take some responsibility for that because I started the IETM Australia Council for the Arts Project. But what I would like to say is that artists, that my argument is that societies will do better culturally, economically and socially if they put artists in the centre of the national conversation. And the reason is that artists, that in a time of exponential change, which is what we're in at the moment, artists, as a result of their practice, inhabit that space of change more than any other social agent. So the questions that they will propose and the ways about which they will solve problems are different to any other social agent. And so the problem then is, how do we insinuate ourselves into that conversation? And in the book, I basically propose that because of the low status of the artist, that what the artist needs to understand more than anything is that why should we expect society to value what we do if we don't value that ourselves? And in order to value that, we actually have to speak up, we have to change our language, we have to use, and I think the gentleman this morning, Alexandros, really said it beautifully, to actually embrace and widen the definition of art so that it is much more inclusive, so that we change the way that we think of art as artists, so that it is not bordered, it's not discrete, it's porous and it's more ephemeral. And yet the language that we need to use needs to be much more concrete in order to penetrate and intervene.
There was a... Can pass the round by this one.
For me? Hello, my name is Kyriakis Panou. First, I have to talk about a failure. We had designed to do a cafeneo here in Athens, in IETM Athens. No, I want to say something else, and that it had... No. All right, okay, I proceed. But it had to do with kind of democracy and how we work here. And I wanted to agree with this fellow from Spain that the context we're discussing now is different for us and from Europe. What another fellow said about cultural policy, I think that we can say thank you to the state that we don't have any money from them now, because we had spent a lot of energy just for phone calls, just for invitations, just for public relations, and we forgot so many other possibilities of working together and giving credibility to our work. So that's another way of answering to what is our responsibility. It's a responsibility of make, in such difficult time, very credible the way we work as artists in the society. and to connect again, not in education. I don't believe starting again from the secondary or the primary school, but going out to the society, being credible in the structures we form from the bottom, because these structures will, after 10 years or 5 years, they may suggest something for the strategy, for the cultural strategy of the cultural policy of our state. I think we are in such a difficult but very challenging time to say, thank you, we don't want your money, because your money now, it has to ask for us to say yes to everything, to hear. Everything is changing, and storm of new ideas and new ways to work here in Greece, or I don't know, in Spain, but from the bottom up. No cultural policy now.
There's a gentleman up there. Sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't see him.
I just need...
Just hold on a second. Okay, 1, 2,
Luca?
3 is this. Yeah, hold on a second. Just let me see. You, Euripides?
I just want to go because I have to.
Sorry.
I apologize. I'm saying goodbye. This has been great. Thank you so much. This is for everyone.
And good luck and better weather. Better weather than yesterday. Thanks. So let me just count. I have 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 here. 1 up there, 1 there, and that's okay. For now, that's all. Right. Go.
Hello, my name is Levan Khetaguri. I'm from Georgia, Tbilisi. I would just like to share a few reflections in the content of the presentations, and I think that, of course, somehow we are on the same round if we still discuss the cultural policy issues, because the problem is that we didn't go faster, because the case is talking about the development of cultural management, how it was implemented at the universities, now it's kind of qualification. We didn't talk about how to improve cultural policy as the applied science, because this is quite important issue. At the same time, we didn't talk about the cultural rights, because we still can talk about cultural policy, which is just case of discussion, but we didn't talk about the real implementation. Talking about cultural rights, this is quite important issue, because we need to take care for both sides, for the citizens as their rights and for the artists as their rights. And in cultural rights, we need to be quite clear what is the guarantee of our self-expression. And in this case, we can think that if, for example, the human rights issues was issued after the French Revolution, in practice, only after 200 years during the Helsinki process was recognized by everybody, the general human rights, and the cultural rights somehow is part of the human rights, because any citizen had rights to receive culture and same time to share with self-expression. And I think maybe in future discussions can be focused more on this way, because when we're talking about the politicization of the arts, or to go into the policy, I think former Soviet bloc have this ideology, this experience when culture became part of ideology, and if we now decide again to turn on this way, I think we have quite good examples how it's ended. Thank you.
It was neglected, I'm sorry. Just, if you can put your mind to... Let's start from top and we'll go down. Just for... I see this is George.
Hello. It's very important what was said about language and about advocating both to politicians and also to other cultural sectors what art can do for democracy, for society, and for sustainability, whatever that means. Greece is a nice, this is an invite. Greece is a nice place to do workshops and to do, I don't know, job fairs, I don't know, for this kind of positions, for this kind of people, because as it was said, we do not have this capacity in the arts. Unfortunately, I'm generalizing a bit, but we are many artists, but we don't have people who are dedicated so much to structure and to strategy. We don't have people who can organize advocacy and who can show us this language that David was talking about. Other countries can do that much better, and they've done it in the past much more. That's my belief. I have to also say that right now, many people do not have jobs in this country, which means that many people work for something to come, for something that might not give immediate, right now, benefit, economic benefit, but it can be promising for the future. I'm just saying this to point out that any perhaps even more specific workshops regarding this issue of networking and advocating and structuring the support mechanism for artists, I think it's a good idea to have in this country with the aid of the international community.
Thanks. There was just if you can pass there. Oh, yes, let's go top down.
Thank you. I'm Cristina Carlini. I come from Italy at Association, and I can recognize a lot of similar topic from Greece to Italy, of course. And it was very interesting because I think that we share the same problem to have some responsibility in don't have found and it don't be supported by the cultural ministry, okay? And the first problem is for sure that we can do advocacy together. We're like animals that fight for a piece of bread. Everyone wants a piece and we don't work together, never work together, to demand more and to demand that it's cultural policy. But about what you say about education, I want to add that maybe we have to think about education in art in the other way. We have a lot of artists that work for free right now to go on with production, to go on with theater, even if the situation is getting worse and worse. And I don't think that it's fair. Right now, we have the problem to make audience understand that what we are doing is a job, is not a hobby. And I work in theater right now since 7 years, and when I was in university, everyone was asking me, okay, what you're going to do? Oh, I want to work in theater. No, as a job. No, I want to work in theater, and right now I'm working in theater. I'm being paid for what I do every day in my life. I hope so. So I think we have to reconstruction the way the audience see us and watch us and look at us, even in this way, as a job, as an important part at workers. And as a workers, we move economy, and we do economy, and we have support in economy. So it's not only a problem of cultural policy, but even to have an important statement as workers and as job. Okay.
Just a question. The people working in the art do a job, but the people working in the civil rights and the human rights, they do a job as well. And the one that work environmentalism, they do a job as well. So, and they're living very similar challenges. That's the point. So, if you look at this way, then advocating just for your job rights, it doesn't lead to the result. And if you look, if you look at the general youth condition in employment, which is extremely precariousness and project, is the failure of the society to provide stability, a social role around jobs. So what I'm saying is that this is all true, but if you just make it as demand for the sector, it doesn't go. I mean, in my opinion, it goes nowhere. Just because it's common in the debate. So.
Yeah, I want to agree with that completely, actually, because I think the notion, and I actually disagree with you, David. Actually, I thought I was going to agree with you, but I ended up disagreeing with you. Because I think the idea of the artist as being exceptional, of course artists are exceptional, but as being exceptional beyond everybody else is just not right. There are people working in social enterprise, there are people working in science, there are people working in all kinds of areas who have similar values, as the same point you were making. And I think that just lobbying for the role of the artist and the arts in society, I think it's a losing game. I think we have to make common cause around what I was talking about earlier on, those kind of questions, with people who might not think exactly the same as us, but actually have they're not a million miles away from us in values. It's much more effective, I think.
Good morning, I'm Stéphane Gros-Claude from Interregional Platform for Cultural Development in France. Public policies are decided, organized at different level, and as everybody knows here, the European level is considered first of the national level. So I think it should be relevant to deal a new device for culture, and as European Union made possible services for general public interest for healthcare. Do you think, maybe John, you have an opinion on this? Do you think it could be relevant to get services of general economic interest for culture?
I take the liberty to not answer, because there was. Let's go down. There was a question here. I request so intervene, speak, and then I will get back. Okay.
I just want to make. Actually, my name is Eugenia Dzirtsilaki. I'm a Greek theater maker, and I just want to make a quick comment. It's not really a question. In relation to what David Pledger said. The way I understood it, I completely agree. And I just want to add to that what's really happening that brings the arts together with all the other professions that you mentioned, like, scientists working for common good or human rights and all this, is the fact that gradually, not just in Greece or Europe, but overall, globally, governments are working like corporations. And that's the end of it. The reason for a government to exist used to be, the lesson of the Renaissance about common good and what a virtue is has been completely twisted, bit by bit, and now we're in a reverse situation. In some, when you tip this part is going to go first, but this is going to go louder. So I think we go first, but in the flip, other places that consider, the European North problem as attached to the Balkan or Mediterranean DNA or character, they're going to go harder, because this is a moment for artists to ring the bell and, make a loud message that this is a systematic error, this is a system error, and it's not us that need to redefine ourselves, it's not artists that need to redefine their position within this system, it is the system that has changed, and the human factor is not in the center. So, just adding to what you said, basically.
There was, there, up there.
Hello, my name is Margarita Pournara and I'm a journalist for the Greek's leading newspaper Kathimerini. I am covering the arts for 20 years and I have three very brief remarks to make. The first one is that, according to me, I think there's not a critical mass in Greece that could support cultural institutions, even libraries or even bookstores. We had a historic bookstore that was closed down about 6 months ago. That was a very sad story. Remark number two, I think we're discussing about the role of the arts and society, but we haven't discussed yet, just Mr. Kieffer did, what artists themselves are doing. And I think this is their great responsibility that they have avoided up to now. So I'm going to give you an example. Why do I believe this? About 2 weeks ago, we had the opening of the Athens Biennial. And actually, the organizers decided this year to do a sort of experiment. So it's not a conventional sort of exhibition with one curator and many artists on a venue. We still have a venue, but we have 30 curators. And each one of them has selected 2 or 3 artists. And they decided to do that as a democratic process. They were gathering and had discussions and discussions and again. I don't think this worked for themselves, but not for society, because the title of this biennial was very ambitious. It was Agora. It was the first form of parliamentary democracy in ancient Athens. It didn't work. We have the venue of the biennial in the same street as the meat market in Greece. And we can see thousands of people going there every day to buy cheap meat, but they would never go in the biennial space. So I think that, as you very cleverly said, I think artists themselves, as far as visual arts are concerned, many times are focused on curators, museum directors, and collectors. And right now, I'm not sure they can do that. They need to do this transition to society and to demand and what people want, and that's the hardest thing to do. That's their problem, actually. Because all this time, they weren't listening to society. They were listening to other things. So this is what I believe. Thank you.
Alexis.
Well, I would like to say something to the last remarks and to some previous remarks. First of all, I think if one artist has lost his contact to society or to society topics, then maybe he's not an artist. So maybe we should reflect what we call artists nowadays, because I think it's difficult if we accept that art exists outside of the society. It's like naming artists like kind of aliens that exist in some other planet. And so if they do so, it's their problem. It's not the problem of cultural policy. To come back to something that someone else said, I completely disagree to say to the politicians, keep your money. It's not their money, it's our money. And because we have European elections coming in front of us, I think it would be completely stupid to say this is a status quo that won't change ever. If we accept that, if we accept that all the discussions that the politics have are about economy and they don't discuss topics about culture at all, and they don't include culture in the programs, then don't vote for them. Don't legitimate them. It's very simple. Because if you say it's a problem of democracy, the problem of democracy is that we are not active citizens anymore. It's not the problem of the system, it's our problem. So if we are not citizens, we cannot expect for the state, the big state or the big politicians to do something for us. So the withdrawal of demands towards the politics is a very dangerous path, in my understanding. So it's like if we were saying it's something that won't ever change, they will do, as the colleague said, they will continue operating as a corporation and they will never get back to really dealing with problems of society. But when did we accept that? When did we dismiss our possibility of intervening in that? I don't see that. So I don't really think that's a good way to say the crisis is there, so let them keep their money, and let us find other ways to finance our art. No, I don't agree with that. Thank you.
we are on time, more or less, I think. So it's John, you want to comment something?
Yeah, I was just thinking of your point. Actually, it'd be great to have a campaign called System Error, wouldn't it? Actually, and just flag up every time, not just in the arts and culture, but every time somebody makes a undemocratic move to take something away. I think you should do that. I was thinking also of Luca's point about cities. I mean, it is sometimes easier to see something happening on the basis of a city. You can see the different things come into play and so forth. It's very hard to talk about cultural policy in abstract. And one thing I would share was that I spent 2 weeks, actually, not a week, as a special advisor to the culture minister in the UK. I had to resign from that one, so I would have been sacked if I hadn't done. But what was interesting to me was that she said something at the end of a meeting. She'd been approached by a lobby group from within the museum sector, and they spent a lot of time preparing their presentation and so forth. It was a very strong presentation. But on the way out of the meeting, she said to me, when will people learn that lobbying doesn't work, actually? And what works is somebody else representing your needs to a politician. Then they start paying attention. Whether it's a business leader, whether it's a technology specialist or something. That's where it has the impact. If we go and say we're great, however we do it, it's not going to work. Actually, we need our wider constituency saying we're great. Actually, and that's when it gets interesting, and that's when they have to start paying attention. That's my lot, really.
Yeah.
And just thank everybody. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks to the British Council. My phone's ringing here as well. And thanks to, I just want to say the volunteers and the way this has been organised has been fantastic. I think you all deserve huge praise for that.
I'm not supposed to wrap up, just want to myself contribute a couple of comments. The first one is that I guess that most of you have heard about a guy named Machiavelli. And he was writing interesting books in the past. One of them, which was The Prince, has a chapter dedicated to the introduction of new orders, which I would suggest you to read again, shifting the word army with the word constituency, because I think it's very enlightening. The true point, is that political decision-making is result of negotiation. It's results of weights. It results of forces. It results of fights. And the reason the reason of the system error, which I agree 100% there's a system error, is that in the decision-making, the political decision-making, the only real forces which is being represented are those that make benefit out of this situation. I mean, if we think that, that the word is just, I don't know, someone referred to the Declaration on Human Rights. I think that's the value for everybody, I would say, for current and future generation, because that's include the environmentalist approach. But in the last 30 years, thanks to the perception of being richer, because while we were becoming more indebted, I would say, indebted, yeah? So that's been the mechanism, getting money for free. We thought, we forgot, we give up to challenge the race of a power which makes the most of its benefit by the dissolution of the public sphere. This is the transnational cooperation approach to the market. It's what you have seen in United States debate over the health care and the fight with Republicans in the Senate up to yesterday. That's where we are. This is our time. So if we take into account that and we really see that we have strengths, and these strengths are these kind of very intangible things that we build in this part of the world, which goes under democracy, rights, arts, freedom of expression, and so on. And the decentralized governance. And third, Europe, which is the first attempt in human history to build a sovereignty which is not resulting from the victory of someone over someone else, which has never happened before on this scale. So if we don't take into account, we don't take these capitals and we put it together and we do politics with this, fighting against that powers which makes the most benefit of these things, which is simply represented by the growing differences between the poor and the rich. This is the last 20-year distribution. It's like that. So if we don't do that, we are condemned to live in a society which is non-democratic. I think we have to be aware of that. And if you're aware of that, the only serious things that we can do is to take responsibility of our political role in society, which is not just doing political arts. It's being citizens. It's being citizens equal as other citizens. And find allies with other citizens that fight for the same values in different way, imagining that the way to implement that values in the future is necessarily different from the one we have done after the Second World War. That's where we stand. And I think if we accept that, we can easily imagine that at the level of the local government, there are coalitions which can be built on the ground that can push the political power to take a decision, which, by example, go in the urban plan and the way you shape and the architecture, because that things change the shape of the human life, but also impact on the interest of these people, which made large part of their wealth of a real estate mechanism. Can you do that? I think you can do that. And I think that Athens is a perfect place to do it because you are in the need to do that more than anybody else in the rest of Europe. So if you take this tremendous challenge in which you are here, has, the necessity to become something more relevant into society, I think you could open a path for other people in Europe, as it has been done some times ago in the past. But this is, if you want to go that way, know that there is people across Europe that will be with you. That's for sure. You have it here, and there are others. Certainly, the organization I manage, it will be with you, as I guess IETM, which is represented there. Thank you very much for this fantastic conversation, and let's get a rest. Thanks.